All right, so let's walk through just one example of using a large sample and using that large sample to make a hypothesis test about some mean. Now, the example that I'm going to use is whether or not women, quote, like the Democratic Party. And I know that this is a pretty easy and simple example, but I want to use this in order to stress the precise steps that you need to walk through in order to conduct a hypothesis test. So the data that we're using come from the 2004 American National Election Survey, which asks people to rate the Democratic Party on a feeling thermometer 0 to 100, 0 being strong, strong dislike, 100 being strong, strong uh, favorability. And we're going to use data just from respondents that self-identified as being female. We're going to assume for this class that anything over 58 means that you like the Democratic Party. And this is, again, just a silly example. There's no reason that we need to pick that. It's just for pedagogical purposes. But essentially what we want to do is we want to set up a hypothesis test such that we can reach a conclusion whether or not women like or dislike the Democratic Party on average. So that means in order for you to be neutral, you'd have to have a score of exactly 58. So I'm setting this hypothesis test up in a specific way. The overall mean that we get of women respondents on their mean favorability toward the Democratic Party is 60.5. There are 626 respondents that self-identify as women, and the standard deviation within that sample is 24.9. So one standard deviation around 60.5 is 24.9. That is roughly going to equate to about 1 with regard to our standard error. Now, what assumptions do we have to make moving forward? Well, we have to state what kind of data we have. So we have continuous data, right? It's from 0 to 100. We have a large sample, over 600 respondents, and it is a random sample as far as we know. Our null hypothesis is going to be a two-sided test here. So again, we're determining whether or not women are not neutral. So in order to find that out, we have to set up our null hypothesis such that mu equals 58. And if we find sufficient evidence to reject the null, then we would have sufficient evidence to suggest that the average favorability among the Democratic Party among women is not 58. So we need to construct our z-score. In order to do this, we just kind of plug in the numbers from above. We know that the overall from the sample, the overall mean was 60.5 on the favorability scale. We want to find out whether that's different from the true underlying population mean, which we believe to be 58 under the null hypothesis. And all of that's going to be over the standard deviation that we find in our sample, the standard error, sorry, and our test statistic equals 2.5. That's probably not going to mean too much to you intuitively because you don't have a Z table up and you probably don't know the calculation of the distribution off the top of your head. So I typically encourage you to use R. The way that you're going to do this, since it's a large sample, you can use, this is referencing the normal distribution. Remember, this is a two-sided test, so we're multiplying this by 2. Given that it doesn't matter if it's in the top or the bottom tail, the test statistic doesn't have to be positive or negative, so I just take the absolute value there. And you can see that we end up getting quite a low p-value 0.012, which is below our critical threshold. So technically, we are going to consider that to be good enough. But again, remember, this is all arbitrary. If the rule of thumb was having a p-value below 0.01, we would have missed it just by a very small margin. Now, I want you to think to yourself, and I'll provide the answer in a couple of seconds, but why may we be using a two-sided test here? The correct answer is that I've kind of baked it in. The research question was whether or not women like or dislike the Democratic Party, so non-neutral. We defined being neutral as being 58 on the likability scale, so that's why we set up our null hypothesis to be a two-sided test. We very well could have wondered whether or not women on average were above a certain score, and then we would have had a one-sided test.